Hi, everyone, and welcome to our seminar entitled Successful Compliance with Industry Regulations, ZwickRoell's testXpert 3 testing software, and DQ, IQ, OQ qualification services. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for investing the time to attend our webinar. My name is David Phillips, and I'm responsible for market intelligence in the Zwick Roell group. Compliance with ever-changing regulations can be challenging for companies in the medical and pharmaceutical industry. With the emergence of COVID-19 crisis, new companies started producing medical products such as face masks and shields, or respirators and its components. For them, the regulatory environment is completely new. In this webinar today, we want to show you how Zwick Roell can support you in compliance and qualification, especially the features of testXpert 3 testing software, and with services designed to increase repeatability and traceability. Before we get started, let me remind you that we will be taking some questions at the end of the webinar, and you can submit these questions at any time using the Q&A function on the GoToWebinar panel, which you'll find on the right side of your screen. We will answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar, but any that we're not able to cover will be answered personally by email. Now, I'd like to introduce my expert colleague for today's webinar, Jochen Niederberger. He is our business development manager for the medical and pharmaceutical industry, and he will share his experience and insights with you today. Hi, Jochen. Welcome to our webinar. We hear a lot about regulations in the med pharm industry, and before discussing the support possibilities of Zwick Roell, I wonder if I could ask you for some background information regarding some of these regulations. Would this be okay for you?
Hi, David. Hi. First of all, thank you very much for the introduction and a warm welcome to all listeners from my side. It's a pleasure to be here and to share my experience. And I totally agree. It's a good idea to start like that.
Okay, great. Can you share some information about why and when the regulations were implemented?
David, you mentioned that there are quite a lot of regulations in place, and that's true today. And they keep on changing. And what is really interesting when you look in the history, you can really see that all the regulations were or are a direct consequence of some catastrophic events that happened in countries all over the world. And I brought just some examples in that case, two examples with me. So let's go back into the year 1938, and there the Food and Cosmetic Act in the USA was implemented. And this was because there were 107 deaths. Amongst them, there were a lot of kids after they took a cold medicine. And the reason was a toxic substance that was used as solvent. And this was not identified because at that time, no toxicity studies were done. And 40 years later, we move onward to Germany. The German Medicines Act was published. And this was also a consequence to the Kevendon, or how it was known in Germany, to the Contagion scandal. And this was a tranquilizer that was sold million times. And the problem was when you took that in the early pregnancy, this could cause defects in the growth development of the fetus.
I remember you call it the Kevendon scandal. I think we knew it more as the thalidomide scandal. So for different people around the world, it had different names. This was in the news when I was 18 years old. This is a long time ago, and you said the regulations keep on changing.
Yeah, you're right. And I was not even born on 1978. But although the regulations are in place, there are unfortunately also other, let's say, scandals in the year 2000 and later on. And this demonstrated a lot of weaknesses also in the inspection, but also in the manufacturing process and the quality control. And I also want to mention two, let's say famous is maybe the wrong word, but two examples. So first of all, I would like to mention that from 2001 to 2010, there was this poly-implant prothese scandal. And this was actually a French company that sold breast implants. And instead of putting high quality silicone in it. They just put cheaper industrial grade silicone. And this caused a lot of problems because the implants could burst in the body and the silicone flow or was in the whole body. And a lot of patients still suffer from that. And there were a lot of additional surgeries necessary to exchange the implants. And in that time, there was also an accusal of the TÜV Rheinland, and this was the organization who was responsible to do the inspections or the auditing of that company. And the other point was in 2008, DP is a big company for biomechanics and orthopedic, and there was one thing about hip implants, and DP kept on selling them, although they knew that they were toxic in the end. And still a lot of people suffered or still suffering from that consequences of that toxic hip implants. And due to these scandals, there was also another sharpening or strengthening of the medical device regulation. So that should replace this medical device directive that is currently still valid with the MDR in Europe. And actually, there was an overlapping period that should just end in May 2020. But here also the COVID-19 pandemic has a huge impact because, let's say, the overlapping period was just, let's say, postponed or prolonged until May 2021.
Okay, I got it. I think it's clear then why regulations still continue to change. Jochen, earlier you mentioned that there are quite a lot of regulations in place. Could you please tell us what is the overall purpose of these regulations?
The overall purpose, as you describe, is to safeguard the patient's safety. And I think that's always important to keep that in mind, because very often when you talk to companies, but also you look from outside, it looks complex, it looks challenging, it looks like a lot of paperwork. Let's say, but finally, they really want to ensure that no patient is harmed, that nothing happens like what I have shown a few minutes earlier. And beside that, from my perspective, the most important thing is also the purpose of having a high product quality and the integrity of data.
Right. Yeah, I think we can fully understand that now. I think as well, trust in products and processes, especially in MedPharm, it has to be an absolute must. So let's step back to the regulations again. When does a company have to fulfill the laws and guidelines? And could you give us an overview of the most relevant ones?
And this is an important topic, and it's important to understand that a medical pharmaceutical company must fulfill the laws and guidelines of the country in which they want to sell products. If you look at, I want to highlight it for Europe and for the USA, there's quite a lot of laws and guidelines available. So in the EU, there would be, for example, the EU GMP guidelines, the PICS GMP guidelines, the GAM5 guidelines, the ICH guidelines, but also the medical device regulation I just talked about. And in the USA, there's a 21st CFR part 210, 211, 11, 820, but also FDA good practice guides, ICH guidelines have to be considered. And and here it's important to mention that there's really a difference between laws and guidelines.
Yeah, Jochen, I'm interested to know more about that. Could you clarify a little more the difference between laws and guidelines for me?
So although the name is the most you can see is just guidelines, there's the difference. The laws are legally binding, and so they definitely have to be fulfilled. And such laws for EU would be the EU GMP guidelines, but also the medical device regulation. For the USA, it would be the 21st CFR series. And so what is the problem with the laws? So they tell you just what to do, but they do not tell you how to do it. And this is why a lot of organizations just enter that area and issued some guidelines describing how something must be done. And amongst these organizations, there is the ICH, the International conference on harmonization. There is the ISPE, the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering, and this ISPE is also the let's say the author of one of the most famous guidelines, the GAM5, so the Good Automated Manufacturing Practice, and this really gives detailed information about GXP compliant computerized system, and it is meanwhile, let's say, the worldwide recognized guideline for that.
Okay, thank you. So besides the safeguarding of the patient, I remember that you also mentioned data integrity as a key purpose of the regulations. So when we do testing with our testing machines, we produce a lot of data in the form of testing results. Is this also affected?
Yeah, definitely. So the results we produce, our testing results, are really important. Why? Because based on this test results, medical products are designed if you go for the R&D testing. But they even, let's say, more important if we go to the approval of medical products. So our testing results, the testing that we do is part in the documentation they have to go to give to the authorities to get an approval to sell the medical product. And it is also important if they want to sell products who are already approved, and we do testing on batches, so we can release a batch that the products can be sold. And so our testing results really tell, is it a good or bad product, a good or bad batch? And based on that, you really can see, David, that the integrity of that results. So, and what does it mean? It means that they are correct, that they are complete, but also that they are secure is really crucial.
Okay, that's really clear. Okay, we've worked with the med pharma industry, I understand, for a long time now. Therefore, I guess that we're able to help the companies to ensure data integrity. Is that a correct statement?
I think that's you said it correctly. We deal with such companies, I would say, for decades now, and especially during the last 5 to 10 years, we have done a lot of investments, a lot of development into our testing software, testXpert 3, and this was one most time based on input that, let's say, the pharmaceutical companies, our customers, gave us. And so we have developed, from my eyes, two important features. One is the user management, and the other is the expanded traceability option.
Okay, can you give us a little more detail on the user management, please?
So the user management, it's an integrated solution in our testXpert 3 software. And this allows the creation of multiple users with different access rights. So the access rights can depend on the position in the company of the user, can depend on the knowledge they have in materials testing. This is also a precondition for, let's say, that no manipulation can be done on the data. And besides that, we also have a possibility to define password guidelines. So what does it mean? It means minimum password length, for instance, password expiration time, password chronicle. And this is also important because this is always a requirement in the user requirement specification of the customers when they start to have a project. And in the last years, I've seen a lot of them, and I can say that all the guidelines, the requirements regarding the guidelines, we can fulfill all of them with our present solution. What I also learned in the last years that it gets more and more important that there is not a separate administration that has to be done. That means we have a Windows account that is normally taken care by the IT departments, and we had the user management administration that has to be done in testXpert 3. So two systems. This is not efficient. And that's why we also implemented this LDAP functionality so that within testXpert 3, you are now also, our customers are also able to use the Windows accounts.
Okay, I think we can see from that slide that there are a lot of possibilities there. So let us come now to the second feature you mentioned, and that I think you said that it was the expanded traceability option. Uh, what does that actually mean, and when is this option required?
Mm. Yeah, it's an option, as I said, and therefore it's not mandatory. And it is definitely required if you want to, or let's say if our customers want to comply with the 21st CFR Part 11 or with the EU GMP Annex 11. And before we go deeper into the software, let me please give you again some more background information. So this FDA 21st CFR Part 11 is about electronic records, about electronic signatures. And it really defines criteria when electronic data can be used instead of paper or handwritten signatures on paper. And you can imagine two cases when this is relevant. So first of all, if the customer wants to get away from paper to a non-paper or to paperless office, or the second one is if they want to hand over documentation to the FDA or any other agencies in electronic format instead of paper. And then, David, I think you see that it's pretty much important that the data is complete, that it can be stored in a secure way, and that it cannot be manipulated. And this is especially important for changes because they also must be visible, clearly indicated, and traceable in the end.
Right, I understand how important that is. I think it will also be useful, Jochen, if you could give us some more details about that option.
Yes, for sure. So as it is an option, it can be activated in a separate way. And once it's activated, it logs all test and system relevant actions. And this really depends on the configuration that is done by the customer. And beside that logging of parameters and actions, it's also possible that you can trace the reasoning. So that means when you change entries in the fields, and I think that's also important.
Okay, so it looks really comprehensive, but is it difficult to configure this?
I would say it depends. So we also have thought about about that, and we have done some pre-configuration possibilities. So we have minimum, standard, maximum entries that are available. But for sure, it's also possible to have an individual configuration so that our customers can do it on their own. And then I would say it's not complicated, but it's quite a lot of work. And for sure, some customers do it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that option. And you can imagine our testXpert free software offers a lot of parameters, a lot of actions. So it's a long list. And to keep that in a good overview, we also have the possibility to export these settings and also to print it out. And this is very often done by our customers. They just print it out and add this to the qualification documentation.
Okay, so the configuration of the option is now clear, I think, to me. But could you describe how, for example, you can track the reason for any test parameter which might be changed by the user?
Mm. I think that's good to have it done on an example. And I would to go for the grip to grip separation at the start position. And let's imagine we want to change the value from 120 to 150. And this is now also helpful to understand how this option works. So without that option, you would not even recognize that change. They would just go in that, if they are able to do it from the access rights point of view, change it from 120 to 150, and that's it. And with that option, it's possible, first of all, it's locked, but then if the reasoning is activated, it is not only possible to click on OK and say, yeah, that's done, but then really the user has to enter a reason why this is done. And this is also later on visible in the logging.
Okay, thank you. Jochen, you mentioned several times that this change will be logged and visible. How does this work, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah, this logging is extremely important, and you can see that all changes and reasons are saved automatically and independently in a system audit trail or test program or test series protocol. And it's also important to mention that this data is saved in a binary coding, and this means that it cannot be edited by any Windows standard programs. And sometimes, maybe on a regular basis, or if something went wrong, it's extremely important to get access to that logging. And therefore, it's also possible to just display the logging or export it to a readable format. This could be HTML or PDF. And this is for sure also limited to the authorized persons that are allowed to do it. And then really the logging shows exactly when it was done, what was done, by whom it was done, and finally also who permitted that action or that change or signed it off. And this is, let's say, if they activate the electronic signature.
Okay, so the logging really describes what happened in detail. I see that similar to maybe to the black box in an aircraft. So I could imagine that this is a big help when results are not as expected and so on. What about the electronic signature? I learned that 21 CFR Part 11 is about electronic records that we already covered and electronic signature.
David, the comparison with a black box is really good, and it's definitely a big help, if especially when something went wrong, to have a better understanding what happened. Was it, let's say, a user who changed something because he was not aware that this change caused the consequences, or was it maybe the material that just was not in a good shape? And that is also why this option is very often purchased, just to have a logging like for a black box, and then in case of something happens, they just look at it and have a better understanding. But as you also mentioned, electronic signature, and I described it with the requirements of the 21st CFR Part 11, it must be utilized. And once they want to do it, first of all, the precondition is there must be a user management in place. So that means without a user management, it's not possible at all to set up an electronic signature. I think that's clear. And once the user management is implemented, it's also possible to define who or how many people must sign. So if it's just one person, if it's a 4I principle, and so on. And another point is, you can also decide with the electronic signature whether you want to do it for the test program or just for a report. And that means that the test configuration and the test results are then also protected against manipulation. And another important point is that it's directly visible whether these electronic series are electronically signed or not. And this is also, let's say, important to mention.
Okay, so this option seems to be very powerful with many configuration possibilities. And together with the user management, a customer can be can a customer really be compliant with FDA 21 CFR Part 11?
Yeah, they can be compliant. Let's say our software testXpert 3 offers the necessary features, so that enables to be compliant. But it's also what I must admit, so we offer the technology part. So this is covered. But beside the technology, there's also the process, the people. And this is in the responsibility of our customer. So this together, the technology part with the features of testXpert 3 and the process and people, let's say from the customer, this gets then a fully compliant system. And a very helpful document in that context I want to mention is the white paper we have issued.
White paper. What does this mean? Can you give us some information how it helps our customers or maybe some of our participants listening today?
Yeah, this white paper, I think it's quite a typical document in the context of FDA 21st CFR Part 11 or Annex 11. And first of all, it contains quite a lot of helpful and detailed information about the user management, about the expanded traceability we just have discussed. So it's much more that I could show during the last minutes. But in addition, and that's also important, it allows a system evaluation of testXpert free by our customers. So what does it mean? So we really have listed all the detailed paragraphs of this 21st CFR Part 11 and Annex 11. We have checked whether if this is applicable for Zwick Roell or not, and if it's applicable, how we can fulfill it. And this system evaluation is normally done when you start a project. And so if you are interested, I think all our sales organizations are happy to share it with you.
Okay, Jochen, thank you for your insights about the testXpert software features. I'd like to move a little into a different topic because there's still one topic open that we have not yet discussed, and this is the ZwickRoell's DQ, IQ, OQ qualification services. Can you share some information with us about that?
For sure. So I actually started this this service in 2007. So there we had the first inquiry of a pharmaceutical company next to our headquarters in Ulm. And to be honest, at that time, we had no clue about that at all. So we were not really aware of the regulations. We were not aware of the abbreviations in that context. So we decided to get an external consultant to help us to build up competence and to create our first set of IQ and OQ documentation. And the core of what we did then in 2008 is still what we have in our present documentation.
Okay, so since 2007, 2008, you've clearly built up a lot of experience. Before you go deeper into that, can you give us some more details about why our testing systems have to be qualified at all?
Yeah, well, we have discussed a lot about the regulations, and these regulations really require that validation and qualification. And I also explained the GAM5 as a risk-based approach for GxP compliant computerized systems. And this is where I would like to start with a computerized system. So you can see we have a computer system that consists of software, hardware, and also firmware. And on the other side, we have the controlled function of the process. And that's clearly indicated that for the computer system, a qualification is required, and for the function or process, a process validation. And so, David, maybe you're also able to answer your question now on your own.
Yeah, I think I got it actually. I can see by looking at a picture that our test machine and the software are together configured. It's a computer system that must be qualified. How am I doing?
This is exactly the point. Yeah, this is the reason why we have to do qualifications for our systems and software.
Okay. Well, Jochen, what does DQ, IQ, OQ mean?
Yeah, DQ, IQ, and OQ are the, let's say, the steps we support from the whole validation process. And maybe before I go deeper into these abbreviations, let me shortly explain the validation process. So this typically starts with a validation master plan. So this is a document our medical and pharmaceutical companies have to set up, and they have contains more or less the general validation strategy, the principles, what they have to consider, and so on. And now let's imagine we have a request for a testing machine for testing syringes, catheters, whatever medical product they want to do. And such a project normally starts with a user requirement specification. And this contains specific requirements regarding the quality management system, the hardware and the software of the system they would like to have. And it's also interesting, there's a huge variety. So in the 10, 15 years, I have seen a lot of URS reaching from 1 pages to 50, 60 pages long. And along with the URS goes a risk analysis. This means RA. And this is also important because GAM5 wants to have a risk-based approach, and this shall reduce the effort of the validation qualification activities. So what does it mean? So they go and check for each point how critical it is. And the more critical it is, the more testing has to be done later on in the qualification. And then there's the design qualification where we can support, and the design qualification is normally a direct answer of the URS. So we respond to the URS and tell how the system would look like from the hardware point of view, from the software point of view. And so afterwards, and there's a lot of points in between. So we have, let's say the machine is purchased, we have built it up, we have assembled it, it's shipped to the customer, it's installed, it's calibrated, then the IQ is done. And that does mean the installation qualification. And there we really verify the correct delivery, the installation, the documentation of the system. And the next step would be the operational qualification, where we verify the correct operation. So we would check the safety devices, we would check data loss, user management, traceability, and so on. And the last step, after we know that the OQ, so the basic functions are good, it's in a good way, the performance qualification would be done. So and this is for demonstrating that the system is also able to work properly as intended during the daily practice. We check the reproducibility, we check the sequences, and this is very often deeply linked to the processes of the customer. Why this is more or less his responsibility, and we have not done it so far.
Okay, thanks, Jochen. Is the scope then, is it always the same from customer to customer, or do you see differences?
There are definitely differences, and this depends from customer to customer. First of all, what is written in the validation master plan, in the quality manual, but also how experienced that company is with validation or qualification in general. And that is why we have set up 3 different packages. So we have a basic package that contains support for the risk analysis, for the DQ, IQ, and OQ, and it's pre-configured. So what does it mean? So we know what is critical for our system, for the hardware, and especially for the software. And we have defined tests for these critical points. And so I think that's, let's say, a ready-made package. Then the second point would be a semi-individual. So we have some adjustments in based on the comments from our customers. And the last point would be, let's say, the individual qualification package. So this is really customer specific, maybe different kind of testing, different kind of format, and additional things you can just imagine what could be in there.
Okay, I'd be interested to know what is the top selling version, let's say, and how often do you sell a qualification per year?
Yeah, at the moment, the top seller I would say is definitely the basic package, and for sure this also offers a lot of advantage because let's say as it is ready-made, so also the approval process for the documentation is really not that much effort, and that's it's quickly available. We can quickly do it, and the customer can quickly start to test. And I've just checked the number for last year, and we have about 200 qualifications performed, and they were all done all over the world by qualified service engineers.
Oh, so the engineers also have to be qualified. So this means I assume that the service engineers are specially trained. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct, and I can also tell you why. We learned a lot about regulation, and we learned about the specialties of that industry, and that's why it's also important that our engineers are aware of them, because it's not so easy just doing something. If in case of a repair, you cannot change the whole configuration of the system. So this would have a huge impact on the qualified status.
Okay, does that mean then that there could be certain events that trigger or require a requalification of the system?
Yeah, definitely. So our customers must regularly check whether the qualified status is still valid or not. So in case of a change, and this could be a repair, it could be an update or upgrade, they have to evaluate the impact on the qualified status. So does it change? And if yes, is a full or partial requalification required or not? And I have mentioned this 200 qualifications and about 25, so that means about 50 qualifications were requalification, and this was most times because of updates or upgrades of the system.
Okay. Jochen, thank you. I would like to thank you for your insights there, and I think we could probably spend hours talking about this topic. But I would like to move now towards the Q&A part of our webinar, and I'm just taking a look to see what questions we have to find some ones which might have general interest. Jochen, the first question is it possible to audit your company?
For sure, and this is an important step. So according to the GAMP, you have to do a supplier evaluation. I know that there are different kind of formats. There could be an postal audit. Let's say that you just our customers send a questionnaire and we answer it, or there could be an audit on site. I think that both is possible. It just depends on the system, on the criticality of the system. So that's something that we have to define then.
Okay, thank you. Second question, do you have detailed documents about the software programming of testXpert?
This is also a good question, and it's asked very often. Especially the IT departments are really keen on getting as much information how our testXpert free software is more or less programmed, how the infrastructure looks like, how the storage is done, and the integration, let's say, into the Windows world, so that they're also prepared, because they have to prepare some things when you do the installation. They have to take care that everything works fine and smooth. And yes, we have actually, like for the 21st CFR Part 11, we have, for the white paper, we have set what we call an IT documentation. And if you are interested, I think just get in touch with your local sales organization as well.
Okay. Jochen, I hope you can understand this question. It says, is it possible to perform an FAT in your company? Perhaps if you understand, you could explain to us what does it mean, FAT?
That's FAT means factory acceptance test, and this is quite typical, and maybe this is also missing in this, let's say, validation process that I explained. So it would be, let's say, after the DQ at our facility, that the customer comes, checks the system, and tells us if everything's fine or not. So whether the hardware is according to its requirement, and especially the software, the fixtures, and so on. And this is, yeah, we welcome that, because then we are really sure, especially for the complex projects, that everything is fine, because later on we ship it, and then it's even tougher to do any adaptations on that. And especially when the qualification is done, then it has an impact on the qualified status. So yes.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question now, and I think I'm going to choose this one because it's about software, and I think there's going to be a lot of interest in the software of these systems. The question is your software validated?
That's also, let's say, a typical question, and the answer, first of all, is no, it's not validated, but you can validate it. And maybe also some more information. So software validation is really, let's say, a well-known term, and the problem with that term is there's no clear definition. So everybody has his own expectations, and that makes it really complex. So that means also we have a lot of checks in our software that we do during the software development, which we do before we release a new version, and also a lot of software testing, what we do in our qualification. And very often this is really sufficient, and then it's, yes, we have it done, so our software is later on validated. But really, to understand that, we have to go in personal discussion. We have to make clear our standpoint. So what is the expectation from the customer? What is our expectation about software validation? And we see whether this fits, then it's fine. Or if you see there's a gap, we have to check how we can let's say fill it, and find a solution, maybe with additional testing that the customer will perform or we have to do.
Okay, Jochen, I'd like to thank you very much for those answers. I hope that offers some value back to the participants today. Before we go, can I just take the chance to summarize some points which I took from this webinar? So, Jochen, you've explained that Zwick Roell has a long-term experience in this field of different software features, meeting all the MedPharm regulations, especially I recall you mentioning 21 CFR Part 11, but also as well for the qualification services, which have been running now for, I think, more than 10 years, supporting customers all over the world in the validation activities. And one more point I think I could also take out was it seems that you're really aware of all the changes going on in the market, in the industry. You're keeping in touch clearly with the market and making sure that we as a company are always up to date with the systems, and especially as we saw from the questions, there's a lot of focus on software. Is there anything you'd like to add from your point, from a final point of view?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with the summary, and I think you covered most parts. So maybe let me say, I believe we have built up really great knowledge during the last decade. Knowledge about the regulatory requirements, but also, let's say, we have learned a lot for the qualification of our testing systems, and we have improved documentation and so on. But I also wanted to mention that this is really a huge field, and as you said, we could talk hours about that. And when we do training for our engineers regarding qualification, this alone lasts 2 days. So that means I really would like to ask you to contact us, your local sales or service people, and then we can really check how we can support you to be really successfully compliant with the regulations that are, let's say, valid in your country and for your machines.
Okay, that's great. Jochen, thank you once again. And thanks to everybody today for participating in the webinar. I really appreciate and I want to thank you for your attention. Please stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.